Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is S.C. Coleman, author, and in this video, we're going to be taking some more looks at different memorandums of understanding. If that name hasn't become, lost all relative meaning as far as what a memorandum or memo is. These documents are obviously far beyond just the usual understanding of what a memorandum would be. These are far beyond just, the classic office memo type of deal. Even though that's sort of what they're taking in the general tone of what these documents are saying, they do kind of come off like a memo from a particularly obnoxious boss that you might find in any type of office environment. But these go beyond just that. As we've seen in earlier videos, much of this will sort of just be new evidence. I don't know about newer, but new evidence in relation to the other things. I don't believe that anything here, there won't be any particularly impactful new revelations. It's just going to go along the same sort of lines. Immigration being used as a vehicle for child trafficking, the automation of governmental systems, quote unquote, or control structure, via various spying by other means and other names and that type of thing. So this first thing we're going to look at is from the United States Department of Education. At least that is the letterhead. This is dated February 6, 2020, but you can't trust any of these. And we will find some anomalies later that prove just how little you can even trust these documents. We have a Kenneth Marcus, Assistant Secretary, Office for Civil Rights, and Scott Stump, Assistant Secretary, Office of Career Technical and Adult Education, to State Directors of Career and Technical Education, CC Methods of Administration Coordinators. Updated procedures for preparing methods of administration, MOA, describing the vocational career and technical education guidelines. And here we got a whole bunch of other blah, 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 garbage. And basically, what they're doing here in this document is they're operating under the cover of discrimination. We've seen this a whole boatload of times. This is critical race theory type of stuff, right? The purpose, generally speaking, is about control, conquest, coercing measures, shutting down rival businesses, shutting down rivals in general, targeting and attacking people, and all of these other things, all under the cloak of social justice, quote unquote, right? So in this document, the real purpose is to encourage state agencies to harmonize their civil rights compliance activities. That's your kicker, right? And this thing talks about something called Dear Colleague letters. That sounds like things by other means. Now, there's a couple elements listed here, and this is all being done under the 2018 Perkins Reauthorization Act, or Act Reauthorization, allegedly. And I'm not going to go into the little word games that they play in here. If someone wants to read this, they're going to find that a lot of these activities and things are cloaked in word games. But there's a couple things that need to be identified here. First of all, you have subrecipients. And I think that actually the definition they have for subrecipients here is perhaps, and of course they also want, it says here they want guidelines, they want on-site reviews and letter findings. The MOA guidelines with their equity and civil rights activities under the 2018. Okay, so what they would say is they would encourage state agencies to harmonize their civil rights compliance activities under the MOA guidelines with their equity and civil rights activities under the 2018 Perkins Act reauthorization. So that's their cover story, right? Now you got a couple. First of all, we need to set up the ladder of insulation, or the separation. As Richard Mitchell said, the people who control these systems and instigate these things want to be as far away as physically as possible in every form, in name, physicality, everything. They want to be as far away as possible from essentially the consequences of their activities. So they always have an extremely large number of layers of insulation. And so first we've got the Office of Civil Rights, and these are this. So this you first you got the Department of Education, right? And then you've got the OCR and OCTAE, and they're quote unquote agreeing together and then submitting this out as a directive, right? The usual tyrannical boss sending out the memo that everyone's just supposed to blindly follow to the state directors. Those state directors and administrating coordinators are then going to, shall we say, delegate the actual activities to the sub-recipients. Now, one of the things that the sub-recipients have to do is, here it states, states and local recipients describing their state and local plans respectively program strategies for so-called special populations. This is akin to your at-risk population, which is a target designation. Set aside a portion of their state leadership funds, between $60,000 and $150,000, for services that prepared individuals for non-traditional training and employment. That's pretty vague. Similar provisions require state activity in support of many of the same subgroups of people referenced in those statutes as underserved populations. All right. So before we get into the provisions included in July of 2018, we need to reiterate, this is the Department of Education. Then you have, quote, state agencies. Then you have subrecipients. Nowhere mentioned or within the chain of administrative activities is ever included military components. In July 2018, Congress enacted the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, Perkins 5, and a bunch of other crap. The new Perkins 5 provisions include adding homeless individuals, foster care youth, and youth with a parent in active military duty to the definition of special populations. Do you like how they put all those things together? Homeless individuals, foster care youth, and youth with an active duty military parent are equivalent in special populations. However, they're not. Foster care youth are going to be a priority for child trafficking and child harvesting, for obvious reasons. Homeless individuals are, generally speaking, going to be all veterans. If you are a veteran, whether you like it or not, they are going to ascribe the label of homeless to you. The children of active duty military is the most important category. That is espionage. That is intended to collect data and information through the children of those who are actively engaging in operations of warfare. That is not the same thing. That is a big difference. If you can get leverage over the children of individuals who are in active combat operations or otherwise, you can cause serious damage to the military capabilities of force and readiness, which is what active duty is all about. It's force in ready. It's not like a reserve component, right? It's force that is ready, not needs to be called up. It is ready, and it is either ready or it is active, hence the term active duty. Categories for which data need to be gathered and disaggregated for performance reporting, requiring states to make funds available for the recruitment of special operations populations. Now, I need to reiterate again There is, as far as this document goes, no instance of military involvement. None. Evaluation of the performance for special populations and subgroups. This is treason and many other things. So, when they use the word access here, they're talking about entry activity. They're going to ensure that everyone has access, meaning they're going to ensure everybody's involved regardless of whether they would like it or not. According to the attached MOP, or Memorandum of Procedure, boy, they love that word there now. Everything's memorandums now. It's pretty annoying. Improving civil rights technical assistance to CTE subrecipients and state agencies in order to facilitate voluntary compliance. Boy, doesn't that sound like some crap out of like the Stalin-era Soviet Union? Using existing data gathered and reported under the Persons Statute for Civil Rights Oversight and Technical Assistance. As I said, that's their cover story. Strengthening state use of the OCR enforcement network and complaint resolution resources. And mind you, once again, they are using enforcement network and complaint resolution resources, quote unquote, against the children of active duty military. Sometimes you just can't repeat this stuff enough. It's so like brain dead. You know, it's like you read this stuff and it's just, even though they cloak it behind all this garbage language and annoying jargon and nonsense and word soups, you know, it's still plain as day that their purpose is operations of warfare under the cover of this or that. And inimical, adversarial, and belligerent, those are important. They're not allied. You know, they're not allied. They're carrying these things out in an obvious and is apparent in the tone and all of their attempts to reduce liability and all this other stuff. It is so obvious that the intent is malicious. They're not allies at all. They're not friends. They are engaging in enemy operations and doing a whole lot of things to try to separate themselves from it. Additional support for civil rights enforcement is always available to states, districts, and educational institutions. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. All right, so I don't know what else in this document is absolutely necessary to point out. I've got a bunch of things that I think are interesting, but I don't think that they're particularly important other than this repeated use of the word identify. So one of the things that they do, which is sort of the game that they play, they're going to come in and identify instances of quote-unquote discrimination. That word is very interesting because you have criminalization in the word, making something into a crime, but then you also have the word de in the French, which means of, or coming out of, right? Of criminalization. So it's the act of making something criminal. Now, one of the things they're going to identify are unlawful instances, and therefore that would insinuate that there's such a thing as lawful discrimination. And in that line it says, conducting periodic compliance reviews of selected subrecipients and investigation of subrecipients to determine whether it engages in unlawful discrimination and attempting to obtain voluntary compliance. So again, more of that sort of Stalinist form of talking. And then, so we have data comparing total institutional enrollment to CT enrollment by race, sex, and disability. So that's important here. Here they're listing out the fact that they are going to collect data about individuals who are quote-unquote enrolled, whether they like it or not, into these subcategories. And so that's basically grouping and listing out the populations, of which one of those are the children of active duty military. That is a huge deal. It will be up to each individual state agency to determine the details of its program for assisting and monitoring its subrecipients. And there's your, oh, we didn't do it, it's not our fault crap. You know, like that's going to work. That will work in their phony little court system. That's not going to work in the theater of war, which is where they are engaged right now. Assisting subrecipients to identify, there's that word again, identify. And by the way, identify, even though I didn't really point out all the places, is repeated many times in this document. Unlawful discrimination and instructing them in remedies for and prevention of such discrimination. So whether you like it or not, we will find unlawful discrimination. And that definition will be, of course, as they never define it here, will be up to the quote-unquote state agency on how they're going to determine that. And that could be, of course, it's completely up to their discretion, right? That's how they do all this stuff. Now, the next memorandum of understanding is allegedly between the U.S. Department of Energy, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Transportation, DOT, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, on the Federal Life Cycle Assessment, LCA Commons. The purpose is to formalize and provide structure for the Federal LCA Commons as an interagency initiative intended to support the development, standardization, transparency, availability, and robustness of life cycle assessments LCA across the federal government with the objective of providing consistent methods, data, and guidance for U.S. industrial and economic interests. So, to break that down or to remove the irritating cloak wording, what they're trying to do is they're trying to take all these departments, Department of Energy, EPA, Agriculture, Transportation, etc., and they are attempting to put it into a single, centralized, controlled entity from which the entity will distribute its guidance or orders at its privilege. That's tyranny, that's empire, and that's conquest. And it is also inimical to the entire country, to the entire nation, and specifically to the military structure and the U.S. Constitution, to which all members of the U.S. military swear oaths of allegiance, and hence the reason why they want to specifically track the children of active duty military, because they are enemies. The Federal LCA Commons is a community of practice, COP, and a data repository. The COP is, they love that, the COP. Really? This is so stupid. Like a cop, like a police, like cop. The COP is open to representatives of federal agencies to share relevant LCA-related updates and coordinate activities opportunistically across the federal government. So, of course, this is the quote-unquote COP of the departments here, the one who's going to ensure that they stay in line, as it were. The parties intend for the Federal LCA Commons to expand on existing resources and initiatives, develop additional standard products that complement or improve the use of these resources across federal agencies and support programs. So yeah, their job is just to ensure that the departments themselves are doing what they're told. Now, one of the things that's really important to note here is developing standardized background data sets and associated resources, e.g. electricity, transportation, common elementary flow list, and impact methods. That, of course, has to do with control of the grid and increasing public access and usability of LCA-related data products and guidance. That's not what it sounds like. That is more of your voluntary compliance, or whether you like it or not, it's going to happen type of deal. And you're going to be given, in usually a coerced method, access to a usability of related data products. So you're going to be required, which means they're going to input your information, your social security number, tracking codes, all that stuff into the system, and there you have your public access and usability. That type of thing. The parties intend for a steering committee, SC, to be created. The SC's overarching purpose is to provide guidance, endorsement, and management of the federal LCA Commons work products and activities. And that's LCA as in Lima, Charlie, Alpha. The SC may designate LCA data, conventions, and guidance as an endorsed resource. That's in quotation marks. These can be existing resources that are adopted or new work products. New products must have one or more lead agencies and blah, blah, blah. So all of this, of course, is going to become property of the LCA, quote unquote. Crap is just bonkers. If a term of this MOU is inconsistent with any such agency authority, then that term shall be invalid, but the remaining terms and conditions of this MOU shall remain in effect. All disputes arising under this MOU shall be referred in writing to the SC. So yeah, doesn't it sound like they're the ones that are quote-unquote controlling these departments? That's what it does. So the signatures here for the U.S. Department of Energy, we can have Undersecretary for Science and Innovation. And that's a title you do not and have not seen in the United States ever, except for the fact that most of our information is now scrubbed and they are a bunch of backdated documents listing undersecretaries. But that consistently was a UN/European title. Anyway, let's Geraldine Richmond, PhD. Then we have a Shavonda Jacobs Young, PhD, Undersecretary for Research and Education Economics for Department of Agriculture. So these are going to be professors at universities who are pretending to be working for these groups. They have so and such cover identity, essentially. Charles Romine, PhD, Associate Director for Laboratory Programs, National Institute of Standards and Technology, Acting Undersecretary. So that's even worse than just an Undersecretary. Now they're an Acting Undersecretary. U.S. Department of Transportation, Christopher Coase, and a Janet McCabe, Deputy Administrator. That's like a super entry level, low level office position. Deputy Administrator, you know. It's like the associate who works at Hobby Lobby or Walmart. Yeah, they're an associate. No, they're they're working the cash register, or they're a greeter, right? Oh, but no, they're executive assistant associates. You know. Anyway, that's for the EPA crap, which of course is the entity, or under the guise of that entity, they dump the used up bodies of children after they've been extracted of all relevant biological materials, to use their phrasing. Now, this next memorandum of understanding gets a little bit into the overall strategic program, of which technically the last thing we just read sort of leads into this. And that's the automation angle. Mr. Casey Frazier, or Frazier, Frazier, or Frazier, like from the TV show. Instead of Frazier with the Z or with an S, it's Frazier. Senior Real Estate Development Manager, AWS Data Center Supply Solutions. Now, AWS stands for Amazon Web Services. Michael J. Young, PE, and this is from March 15th, 2023, AWS Data Trip Generation Assessment. It is to determine the weighted average trip generation rate for Amazon Web Services data centers located in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It says, to the limited number of surveyed sites, the Trip Generation Manual offers the following disclaimer for this information. Caution should be used when applying trip generation rates for data centers, as the database contains a small number of sites with limited data on the number of tenants and employees. That word there, tenant. Tenant, generally speaking, refers to the person who is actually holding something. It doesn't necessarily mean holding on behalf of someone, it just means holding it, right? But nowadays it just means somebody holding on behalf of someone else, or you're holding it for a period, or, you know, that stupid nonsense that we have to deal with. Data centers have a very small number of visitors, and the majority of trips are typically driven by employees or deliveries. Due to the technological advancements referenced above, data centers have become more efficient over time and rely on fewer on-site employees to operate. Now, that's a big deal when all your quote-unquote government systems are automated on Amazon Web servers, of which they are, just, Amazon AWS/gov user. You just look that up and find out that, even though, it says that you have to be a U.S. citizen to get a Amazon Web Server U.S. Gov site, that's for the U.S. There's Amazon Web Server Gov UK and India and all that, right? So it's all ran through that. To determine the average weekly morning peak hour and evening peak hour trip generations rates for a fully operational AWS data center, these average rates will be developed based on data from 6 existing facilities and will be utilized throughout the planning process for future AWS data center developments in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And of these 6 that it lists, which it doesn't, it might somewhere, but I really didn't spend the time to find out if it has like an overall number of data centers, how many of those there are exactly, and this is just in Virginia. Campus number 4 is the smallest, with 310,000 square feet and 50 employees. Campus number 6 is the largest with 725,000 square feet and 160 employees, and I wonder how many of these are universities. Cumulative trip data for each campus identified above was provided by AWS for the time period of January 22nd, 2022, or January 2022, it doesn't say the day, to January 2023. The AWS data centers are all secure facilities with historical data records, and the trip data provided to Bowman was extracted from the security card readers at each campus entrance. Typical vehicle and heavy vehicle information was able to be included in this data set, as the security gates at the facilities have separate card readers for trucks versus passenger cars. Now, here's an important thing to note here. I have experience with access rosters. Now, one of the things that it says here is that the trips scheduled do not match up to what was originally listed in the handbook or the guidance thing. To me, what that sounds like is control of access through access rosters arbitrarily. What that means is that even though you could have a document which states that you're supposed to have access to a facility for one reason or another, whoever controls the access roster can simply delete your name from that list, and no matter what pretext or other types of documents you have, you're not on the access roster, and therefore you're not going to be allowed in. And that's what it sounds like. They use the control of the access roster to arbitrarily, but really physically and practically, reduce down the number of people who can actually access the facility. And that's the reason why there is discrepancy in the amount of people. And that's because the idea here is essentially more out in the open takeover / control of all the systems throughout the country. It isn't takeover, even though it's sort of an internal takeover. It's a little bit weird because the so-called government and all these other structures have been fraudulent for a long time. What this is doing is reducing the control down to those, to quote, automated systems, to which we all just become basically involved in some automated cattle farm. That's the idea. That's what they're doing here. Now, the next document that we're going to look at, which, by the way, I will list in the conclusion. It says, based on the evaluation contained in this memorandum, the anticipated site trip rates associated with the AWS data centers are lower than those included in the ITE trip generation manual. So that's basically what I just said. So moving on to the next document. Here from June 15th, 2012. Oh, make sure I'm still recording. June 15th, 2012. Mind you, that's the date, right? June 15th, 2012. This is very important to note that date. Specifically because it lists an Alejandro Mayorkas, Director, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Now, from what I'm aware, Alejandro Mayorkas was in fact the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in the year 2021, not 2012. It also lists the David V. Aguilar, Acting Commissioner, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, John Morton, Director, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Janet Napolitano, Secretary of Homeland Security. Oh, wait. It is Memorandum for David Aguilar, Alejandro Mayorkas, and John Morton from Janet Napolitano, Secretary of Homeland Security. What's interesting here is there's a signature next to the name Janet Napolitano, and only that name. That's odd. Exercising prosecutorial discretion with respect to individuals who came to the United States as children. Now, this document, when you look at it alone, it represents something that most people would just gloss over. But it needs to be added alongside another document. That's what we're going to look at here in a minute. And this is about child trafficking. Done by so-called Immigration Services and Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, should, I like that word there, should, enforce the nation's immigration laws against certain young people who are brought to this country as children and know only this country as home. That's an interesting line right there. The following criteria should be satisfied before an individual is considered for an exercise of prosecutorial discretion pursuant to this memorandum. But, it should be done, but if not, oh well, right? Came to the United States under the age of 16. This does not say came to the United States under the age of 16 30 years ago. This could be anybody at all who came to the United States under the age of 16 and could be a baby to 16, right? Between birth to 16. It just somebody who came to the United States under the age of 16. Is currently in school, has graduated from high school, has obtained a general education development certificate, or is an honorably discharged veteran of the Coast Guard or Armed Forces of the United States. Are we seeing a pattern here? It should be very obvious, and absolutely every single person who calls themselves a citizen of the United States should now and forever be looking at any institution who operates under these titles, these organizational structures, these letterheads, or tries to enforce anything under these pretexts as enemy operatives who are deserving of death. I mean, it's pretty obvious in black and white here. They specifically are targeting members and active duty members of the armed forces through children. That's a big deal. Of course, this thing about being a honorably discharged veteran is not, it's sort of like a guideline, because it's going to apply to all of them. With respect to individuals who are encountered by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, or U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, ICE should exercise prosecutory discretion on an individual basis for individuals who meet the above criteria by deferring action for a period of 2 years subject to renewal in order to prevent low-priority individuals from being removed from the United States. This is just a bunch of gobbledygook. USCIS should establish a clear and efficient process for exercising prosecutorial discretion on an individual basis by deferring action against individuals who meet the above criteria and are at least 15 years old for a period of 2 years subject to renewal or in order to prevent low priority of blah, 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 right? Now, this is signed Janet Napolitano with no date, right? So that's going to be a fake signature, a fake person. They don't exist. For obvious reasons, if you're a real person, do not want to put your name on this kind of document. Nobody's going to sign a document. Well, maybe I shouldn't say nobody, but it's highly improbable that most people would sign a document in which they have laid out specific point-by-point plans on how they're going to target and eliminate their neighbors. Nobody just about will do that. And so obviously they're going to be putting fake information here. Fake names and fake nonsense and stuff. And then they're going to get a whole bunch of idiots, as we're going to find out in the next section, to engage in these operations of enemy warfare ignorantly. This memorandum confers no substantive right, immigration status, or pathway to citizenship. Only the Congress, acting through its legislative authority, can confer these rights. That's not true. The Constitution, specifically and only, this is not a right? It's not a privilege. It is an order that the Congress only determines a uniform naturalization, uniform, equal across all. That's what that means. And that's it. Has nothing to do with stay, travel, or anything else. All of the other sections in the Constitution deal with that. All of this crap is not constitutional. More importantly, it is inimical, especially with the strange focus on armed forces. If you are an honorably discharged veteran of the armed forces, why would immigration need to exercise prosecutorial authority over you? Right? And those are just the ones listed here, but they're examples. So I guarantee will apply to active duty, but maybe in this document they don't want to overtly state that. But I bet there's other documents where they do state that. It states that it remains for the executive branch, however, to set forth policy for the exercise of discretion within the framework of the existing law. That's not true. I have done so here. Isn't that nice? Now, here's the kicker. Here's the big deal. Apart from the active duty military component and honorably discharged veteran and all that stuff, there's another element here. The focus here, as I have referenced in other documents, is the acquisition of children, and specifically at-risk children, or those vulnerable to being trafficked so that they can be sent to these high-up corporate facilities insulated on military bases or in universities or wherever else they can find like an embedded area so that they can then harvest biological products from those children and dispose of their bodies on EPA dumping grounds with regular garbage. That is the purpose here. So, you take these children who came to the United States under the age of 16, you deport the parents for some stupid bullcrap reason with the specific targeting of the children, and that's the reason why they want to defer the action. And they'll defer it in incessantly until the child disappears from their system, and thus they close it because there's nothing else they can do, according to them. That's how it works. They kick out the parents, right? Okay, so first of all, they take the whole family together. This is like really important with the stuff going on with ICE right now. This is how they do it. They take the family together, so they're not quote-unquote separating the family. When they're in the detention facilities, if they have the family together and that family has children who support that criteria, they kick out the parents and send them to their country because you don't have any rights or quote-unquote anything, right? The Constitution doesn't matter, according to them. As I've heard about 1,000 times from all the talking heads and morons out there who are obviously acting in belligerent and malicious fashion, they always say the same thing, that the Constitution does not apply to foreigners. Yes, it does, first of all, because it's the supreme law of the land. But second, the operational component of this is really important because at these detention facilities, what they're doing is they are deferring the action of the children while sending away the parents so that they can then move those children to a different facility and then disappear them. Of course, they don't disappear them. What they do is send them to a harvesting facility. That's a big deal. If anybody sees that happening, they should understand that that activity at that point is all about the acquisition of the biological materials of the children, and the ones actually carrying out the seizure might, in most cases, have no idea that that's the ultimate goal and that they are facilitating possibly one of the most evil, malicious, and vindictive operations. However, I will say that from my own experience, regardless of whether or not these people are aware of it, as I've met them, I don't believe many of them would have any issue with it. as far as my own experiences in meeting the individuals involved, right? Not just the paperwork and the phony names and fake identities and all that stuff, but the actual meeting people, right? They'll lie to your face, and I guarantee they have hands in the child trafficking operations, and pretty much every single one of them, as far as I'm concerned, can all, pick your poison as far as removal from reality, shall we say. So January 22nd, 2025, we have, again, an acting secretary, right, the usual, Benjamin C. Huffman, and this one's got a signature right there. Subject, DOJ Immigration Officer Authorization. Now, the authorities that they're conferring in this memorandum are investigating, determining the location of, and apprehending any alien who's in the United States in violation of blah, blah, blah. Enforcing any requirements of such statutes or regulations, of which they can change whenever they want. We know that. The intent of this order is to grant to the employees listed below the same authority already granted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. List of employees granted this authority are as follows: U.S. Marshal Service, Drug Enforcement Administration, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, Federal Bureau of Prisons, and any other employee, Department of Justice, who obtains the approval of the Attorney General. So, obviously, all of these entities are now immigrations and customs and all this other nonsense, right? But here's the reason why they do this. It's because they are using subcontracted security firms like Allied, Securitas, etc. And then they launder through this system these employees, so that way, because these individual entities retain their own employee records, it has the full appearance of legitimacy, and nobody would be the wiser that this is being done by subcontracted security guards. But that's really what it is. And if you did all of the work, which I've done some of it, I'm sure all of these entities are going to have memorandums of agreement and contracts with all of these security firms to support quote-unquote continuance of government, or whatever it's called. Now, moving on to the second thing, apart from all that stuff, this last document is so eye-opening that it completely throws out the window of importance the voter fraud. Voter fraud means absolutely nothing. Why does it matter who you vote for when who you vote for has no power? So this is from the Florida Senate Committee on Reapportionment. This is to all senators, marked simply memorandum. Dated January 5th, 2022. A Ray Rodriguez, if that's even a real person. Reapportionment update for week number 1. This might be the worst of all these documents. Of all the documents that I've read so far. But I don't think so, because I've worked in the Senate, in the Ohio Senate anyway. And even though they don't have any power, so they're just public theater. That's all their job is, really. The tone of this document is what is most important here. I have extensively reviewed both the tactile method utilized during the initial remedial phase of 2012 redistricting and the computerized method used during the later portion of the remedial phase. Why? Why is somebody, this apparent, whatever his name is, Ray Rodriguez, why is he reviewing these things from 2012? And why does this sound like the person who comes into a company to determine who to fire and to cut the internal corporate investigator type of person after a hostile takeover? That's what it sounds like he's doing, but it's going to be more confirmed. As I stated last month, senators need to finalize and submit any maps they wish to offer. That sounds like a professor talking down to, quote, students of a lower rank, to the professor, right? The students are of a lower rank, so they talk down to the student. Or, like I said, a acquisitions manager coming into an office talking down to employees. That's what that sounds like. As I stated last month. So after reading this, if anybody believes that Senates or Congress or any of these other morons out there have any actual power, well, they don't, right? They are being delegated and dictated to by these random people who appear out of nowhere and who on these documents just, for some reason, can go around dictating to the apparent representatives of government. As a reminder, in September, there's that tone again, right? Let's read it again. This time I'm going to talk in the tone that this person is using in their writing. As a reminder, in September, you were each provided with an account that enables you to draw and review maps using the legislature's joint redistricting software. What did he just say there? You are each provided with an account that enables you to draw and review maps using the legislature's joint redistricting software. So why does it even matter who you vote for? There's a software that can just change districts at will. And whoever controls that software can determine where all the districts are. And can just change crap around as they see fit. Right? What's the point? You know? Why even bother? Well, there's two reasons to bother. Not of course, with voting or any of this other nonsense, because it's just a massive waste of time. Whether you argue about it or otherwise, it's meaningless, because you're voting for people who are being delegated to and dictated to as if they were menial employees or students of Ray Rodriguez, whoever the hell that is, right? The biggest reason to give a damn, as it were, pardon the French, is because of the elements involving children and members, active duty members of the armed forces. That is a reason to give a damn.